Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about old school chest building, and that's the floor press. Now, a lot of times when people will mention stuff like this, they'll say silly things like, well, this is an old forgotten exercise. Well, in the case of the floor press, it's not forgotten. The floor press is heavily used in powerlifting and heavily used in strength and conditioning. Right? Tons of strength and conditioning coaches have their football players, baseball players, everyone else use the floor press. So it is very, very far from forgotten. But the reason it's old school is that this was the original bench press. This was the original bench press. This is the OG. This is what people before they built benches did to build their chest and to get a chest press in. And it works. It's very, very effective. It's very effective. But what was noticed many years ago is that the range of motion can be reduced a bit depending upon the size of the person. Now, in my case, if I go straight leg, I can get about an inch from my chest. If I put my knees up and put my feet on the floor so that I have a mild arch, I can touch my chest on the floor press. That's actually considered to be relatively rare, and it's largely due to the fact that I have a really thick back and a big rib cage, in spite of having pretty long arms. So in my case, it's just structural for the most part, but the majority of guys are not going to be able to touch their chest on a bench press. And so what the people ended up figuring out when they started building different devices and equipment, they started building benches. Right? They started building benches because they realized that if you had a bench under you and your elbows could come all the way down, right? Because that's what happens. It's your triceps touching the floor that determines your range of motion. And you can't go any lower than that. And they realized that they could get a longer range of motion in that case. And then they had something more standardized, right? Then everyone could do that because generally speaking, in most cases, a longer range of motion is going to have more potential for muscle growth. Well, the issue that we have is that with the bench press, that's not always the case. And in fact, we find with a few skinnier individuals, the bench press itself can hurt their chest and shoulders because of the longer range of motion. Right? And this is something that varies tremendously from person to person. In fact, I have at least one of my clients who does the floor press instead of the bench because he's skinnier. He's a smaller guy. He's still building up. And he gets a little bit of sternum pain on the bench pressing. So I'm like, look, we can just floor press. I can build your bench off the floor press. And that's what we do. But the problem we run into there is that, yeah, it can be too much range of motion. Furthermore, people who have a history of shoulder issues, the range of motion involved with the bench can be a problem. Now, am I saying that they can't work around that? No, there's plenty of ways to work around it. And we could argue that anyone with healthy shoulders should be able to bench press correctly. And that I do agree with. You should be able to touch your chest if you know how to bench press correctly without injuring your shoulders if you have good muscle balance. But the problem we run into is that people who already have shoulder issues, the bench press can put too much strain on the shoulder joint, in which case the floor press works really, really well. Works really well because we limit the range of motion to a natural range of motion as far as the shoulder joint goes. And because we cut out that bottom and there's a hard stop, it works. It works very well for that. And we need the floor press for that. Because people will say things like, well, couldn't you just stop short of your chest? Now, that's stupid. That is one thing that I will tell you is idiotic, you have no business doing, is ever stopping short of your chest with nothing but air in between it and doing benching. Why? And I'm not talking about the spoto press. I understand that that's a different exercise with a different purpose. But to actually bench press that way and attempt to bench press that way, you have nothing to control the range of motion. You have nothing to control your progressive overload and measure it because your range of motion is consistent. Furthermore, if you're doing it because you have a shoulder issue, it's eventually going to happen. You're going to accidentally go too low one day with a weight you can't press out of the bottom, and you're going to hurt yourself. Right? That's not desirable. And the worst part is that we have some well-known personalities, some well-known coaches, some well-known trainers out there who are telling people, well, you know, if you want your shoulders to be safe, you can just stop at 90 degrees. Right? Stop with your triceps at 90 degrees. They'll say things like that. What they really mean is that they want you to just do the range of motion of a floor press. Well, here's the point I would make. Why not just do the floor press in that case? If you have a coach out there telling you, well, you could compromise your shoulder joint, or particularly those of you with shoulder issues, you need to stop at that point, but you don't have a floor in the way to give you a terminal range of motion, what's going to happen on the bench? You're going to risk injury. Furthermore, you're tying up another piece of equipment that you don't necessarily need to use. You don't need the bench. The floor press would actually be better for you in that case. It would be much better in that case. I think what ultimately brings us to the point. People would say, but how is it a good chest exercise? It's a partial. Well, I'm glad that you asked that. Watch what happens when I do the floor press. Okay, you guys watch. I unrack it. I lower the weight under control. Nice controlled eccentric. When my triceps touch the floor, I immediately reverse the weight. The pectorals are under a tremendous amount of tension there. You're having to keep the pecs really, really tight. Now, I'm not talking about doing continual tension because you can pause at the top. I'm not saying, oh, this will keep you under constant tension, because that's not really the point. Because, again, you'll lose that at the lockout anyways if you pause. The point is that we have a tremendous amount of tension that the pecs are being kept under at the point where there's going to be the most tension in the pecs on the lift, which is the bottom. It forces you to keep them tight. A lot of guys, when they bench press, particularly guys who struggle to build a chest with the bench press, struggle to feel their chest on the bench press, their pecs get loose at the bottom. Okay? They're completely disengaging the pecs. With the floor press, if you do it this way, even with a touch and go, your pecs are still contracting maximally on the eccentric rep. And then you're having to reverse and explode with the pecs out of the bottom. Well, if you go look at a lot of the EMG studies, what happens? It actually shows more chest activation in some of them than similar amounts of weights to the bench press. Right? It shows superior activation. In some cases, superior activation with less weight than the bench press. Which brings me over to my other point. If you want a big exercise to build your chest, build your triceps, all of that stuff, the floor press works very well. Because it's an exercise, it's easy on the joints, and it forces you to use a slightly lighter weight to get sometimes slightly more muscle activation. What does that do for things like stimulus to fatigue ratios? It makes them really, really good. Because it's slightly easier to recover from, because it can be easier on your joints. And again, slightly less weight used for all the same muscles being worked. Okay, that means better recovery. That means we can do more training volume. And if we can do more training volume, we can stimulate more muscle growth if we can recover from that volume. Well, in the case of this, it's easier to recover from. Okay, that makes this a fantastic chest exercise, in spite of the fact that it's a partial. Of course, the point will come up and people will say, but if you're doing only partials, couldn't that predispose you to pec tears? Yes. Yes. Other than number one, this is an exercise that keeps a large amount of tension on the chest at the bottom. Number two, you can always do more exercises. The people who get hurt from doing stuff like that, exercises that don't always work the muscle to the full range of motion, is that they don't do anything that works their chest through a full range of motion. They don't do anything. You can come in and do other exercises. You can do some dips. You can do some pause benching. I hate to say it, you could even do cable flies. I mean, you could do other stuff that works that muscle and that joint through a full range of motion. You could still build most of your size and strength off an exercise like this. And you could do other movements to work that range of the motion that you're worried about losing in terms of strength and mobility. So you have options. It's not like this is the only thing you're going to do for your chest. Okay, that's the problem we run into with a lot of these situations with certain exercises, when people try to use it as the only thing that they do. But in the case of the floor press, this is a very, very time-proven, extremely safe exercise that's used in a wide variety of different applications, up all the way into powerlifting. In fact, there are many powerlifters who feel that the floor press actually has built their bench press for them. And for me right now, for my lagging bench press, it's my primary bench building tool also. And just like with everything else, you have the beauty of being able to use a wide variety of different bars with it. Right? It's an exercise that one of the perks of is that since we can use different bars, different things like that, we can actually avoid overuse injuries pretty easily as well. Just a little minor caveat at the end. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.